New at 5, a teenager from Springville has been found guilty of killing his girlfriend's little son. This afternoon, a jury convicted Dylan Schumaker of the highest charge possible in this case. He beat Austin Smith to death because the boy wouldn't stop crying. That child was just 23 months old. News 4's Rich Newberg is live at State Supreme Court with more on the verdict. Rich?
Don, the jury did convict Dylan Schumaker of the most serious charges. They could have gone with manslaughter or criminally negligent homicide.
Baby killer, and we thought we had a good case.
Prosecutors were able to prove that the night 16-year-old Dylan Schumaker was inflicting the fatal injuries to little Austin Smith, who was 4 days away from celebrating his second birthday. Schumaker's intent was to kill the child.
Clearly, if a child or any human being is suffering multiple injuries over a period of time, that conduct is not accidental.
Schumaker had been babysitting his girlfriend's 2 young children, while Ashley Smith had gone to work at a Springville restaurant for the evening. Schumaker admitted in statements to authorities and to the jury that when Austin had acted up, he had struck the child, later putting a pillow over the boy's head while striking him again in the head. He claimed he never intended to seriously injure Austin.
He lost his cool, as he said. He got frustrated and he hit the child, but never with the intent to cause serious physical injury or Austin Smith's death.
Schumaker's sister, Alex, quickly left the courthouse after the verdict. She had earlier said her brother had just snapped, not having been experienced in babysitting. But Austin's grandmother, Tracy Smith, told reporters she was pleased with the verdict, believing Dylan Schumaker knew he could have stopped abusing the child that night, but continued on.
I don't think he started that way. When he initially hit him, I don't think it initially was intent. I think it became intent. At some point, I think he crossed over into intent.
New at 5, a teenager from Springville has been found guilty of killing his girlfriend's little son. This afternoon, a jury convicted Dylan Schumaker of the highest charge possible in this case. He beat Austin Smith to death because the boy wouldn't stop crying. That child was just 23 months old. News 4's Rich Newberg is live at State Supreme Court with more on the verdict. Rich?
Don, the jury did convict Dylan Schumaker of the most serious charges. They could have gone with manslaughter or criminally negligent homicide.
Baby killer, and we thought we had a good case.
Prosecutors were able to prove that the night 16-year-old Dylan Schumaker was inflicting the fatal injuries to little Austin Smith, who was 4 days away from celebrating his second birthday. Schumaker's intent was to kill the child.
Clearly, if a child or any human being is suffering multiple injuries over a period of time, that conduct is not accidental.
Schumaker had been babysitting his girlfriend's 2 young children, while Ashley Smith had gone to work at a Springville restaurant for the evening. Schumaker admitted in statements to authorities and to the jury that when Austin had acted up, he had struck the child, later putting a pillow over the boy's head while striking him again in the head. He claimed he never intended to seriously injure Austin.
He lost his cool, as he said. He got frustrated and he hit the child, but never with the intent to cause serious physical injury or Austin Smith's death.
Schumaker's sister, Alex, quickly left the courthouse after the verdict. She had earlier said her brother had just snapped, not having been experienced in babysitting. But Austin's grandmother, Tracy Smith, told reporters she was pleased with the verdict, believing Dylan Schumaker knew he could have stopped abusing the child that night, but continued on.
I don't think he started that way. When he initially hit him, I don't think it initially was intent. I think it became intent. At some point, I think he crossed over into intent.
I would give my life for Austin. I loved him a lot.
A young convicted killer cries in court before learning his fate for the violent murder of his girlfriend's son. Good evening, everyone. The death of young Austin Smith shocked many people, but what his killer said in court today is guaranteed to shock you. It's heart-wrenching, but not in the way you might think.
That's right, Don. Something else unexpected happened in that courtroom this morning. News 4's Brittany Smallwood was there, and she can tell us what happened.
Jackie, as soon as the case was called, things got intense. Before Dylan Schumaker could even get situated behind the defense stand, he started crying and telling everyone how sorry he was.
I didn't didn't mean to kill Austin. Ashley, I really didn't. I really think I did that. I didn't mean to hurt him.
Dylan Schumaker walked into a state Supreme courtroom pleading his case, telling his victim's mother and the court he's remorseful for what he did. Schumaker was sentenced Friday for beating 23-month-old Austin Smith last March. Before the sentence was handed down, Schumaker and his defense attorney fought for the minimum sentence, 15 years to life.
I can't take back what was done. I wish I could. I would give my life for Austin. I loved him a lot.
Austin Smith was completely defenseless. That's a given. But there were other dynamics at work there, including my client's inability to either control his anger or frustration and his inexperience in babysitting.
Based on his short life now, what is to say he won't do this again?
Well, we don't know that. I think it's completely unlikely. It was a situational, circumstantial thing.
In Judge M. William Bowler's last words to Schumaker, he told the now 17-year-old that in his short life he's caused so much despair to so many people. Bowler said he listened intently to Schumaker's testimony during trial and called him a manipulator who minimizes his actions.
The record will show that you admitted that on July 23, 2013, in a phone call to your mother from the holding center, you stated, and I got a quote from the court reporter, "I am a 16-year-old blonde. Probably all I have to do is cry in front of the jury, and they're going to feel sorry for me," end quote.
Afterwards, Schumaker was sentenced to 25 years to life behind bars. Schumaker's defense attorney, Joseph Terranova, says he plans to immediately appeal this case. Both say the death of Austin Smith was not intentional.
We've covered many courtroom sentencings like this. This was quite unusual, what happened today, Brittany.
You're very right. This was a very heated and emotional case. You could tell as soon as you walked into the courtroom, and you felt everyone's presence when they walked in. I noticed that whenever Schumaker would speak, the victim's mother, Ashley, she was sobbing in the courtroom. And as the defense attorney spoke, you began to think for a moment that maybe Schumaker did not do this intentionally. But then once the judge spoke and read what Schumaker said in the holding center, then said the day the young boy died, he was texting someone to set up a drug deal and talking to a young female, then you understood really the gravity of the situation.
Yeah, there was much more here than meets the eye. All right, thank you, Brittany.
And tonight we're joined by News 4 legal analyst and former State Attorney General Dennis Vacco for another perspective on this trial. So tragic on so many fronts.
It is, Don, but let's not forget that it's most tragic for the 23-month-old baby. Defenseless. This guy was supposed to be protecting and watching that baby that night. So while, you know, there's a lot of emotion in the courtroom today, mostly from the defendant, I think he's more concerned about his future, which is not very bright. But I don't lose perspective of that 23-month-old who doesn't have a voice in that courtroom today other than Judge Bowler.
And Judge Bowler was his voice, and I think when he pointed to the July phone call of last year from the holding center to the phone call to his mom, he might have sealed his fate.
Well, I think he did. You know, Judge Bowler, you could see in the clip we just saw, he was pretty animated, and quite frankly, I think that he was very upset that the defendant essentially tried to manipulate the process. He thought he was going to manipulate the jury because he was young, blonde, and he was going to cry. Today, Bowler called him out on that. This might have been a far different sentence if it wasn't for the defendant trying to fool the court.
I agree. What about the appeal that Terranova talked about? What are the grounds that they could appeal this case?
Well, look, Joe's a great lawyer, a very compassionate guy. He's a great lawyer, but yet the DA's office did a great job in this case as well. He had a good judge on the case. Every defense attorney says that they're going to appeal, but typically, the grounds for appeal in a case like this that has been tried in front of a smart and careful judge with a smart defense attorney, the grounds for appeal are pretty limited.
That's what I thought. Thank you, Dennis Vacco, for your expertise tonight on this story.
A day for the community today as a 1-year-old boy will be laid to rest.
Austin Smith was killed last week, just days shy of his 2nd birthday. News 4's Brittany Smallwood is following the story for us.
Jordan and Diana, today loved ones will remember the lasting impact little Austin Smith had on their lives during a memorial service. Today, family and friends will say goodbye and lay Austin Smith to rest. 16-year-old Dylan Schumaker is accused of murdering Smith, who would have turned 2 on Saturday. Authorities say crimes like this have to stop.
There's no excuse, there's no explanation for this. We just can't let it happen.
Authorities say Smith was killed last Tuesday inside his Springville home. His mother went to work and left him in the care of her boyfriend, Schumaker. 4 hours later, he called 911.
The 16-year-old, upon discovering at about 8:20 that the child was not breathing, yelled for his mother. I'm not certain. I don't know. The 16-year-old, in fact, then made a 911 call using his cell phone.
Now Schumaker, who is not the child's father, is charged as an adult with second-degree murder.
The child was crying, but in fact, there's no explanation for why anyone would strike a child like that. It can't be explained, it can't be mitigated, it can't suggest any reason that would justify it, but there was some indication that the child was crying just before that.
Schumaker's sister Alex says this isn't something her brother would do. She says he went to Hopevale School and just finished 6 months of drug rehab.
He went to school, he did good in school. He was doing really good, actually, after he got out of rehab. And then, I don't know, he got 2 kids dumped on him out of nowhere.
The town felt like the kind of place where nothing truly bad was supposed to happen. Streets were quiet, neighbors recognized each other, and most days followed the same predictable rhythm. It was the kind of environment where people believed they knew what was going on behind every door. And for the most part, they were right, until they weren't. Among the many young people trying to find their way was Dylan Schumaker, a teenager navigating relationships, responsibility, and the uncertain transition into adulthood. To those around him, he seemed like many others his age, still learning, still growing, still figuring out where he fit. But beneath that surface was a situation quietly forming, one that would soon challenge everything people thought they understood. It started as an ordinary day. Nothing about it stood out. Nothing hinted at what would follow. The routine felt familiar. Simple tasks, small responsibilities, the kind that don't seem overwhelming at first glance. But sometimes, it's in these ordinary moments where pressure begins to build unnoticed. Responsibility can feel heavier when you're not ready for it, when expectations outweigh experience. As the hours passed, there was an undercurrent of tension, subtle, almost invisible. The kind of tension that doesn't announce itself, but lingers quietly, growing stronger with each passing moment. No one outside could see it. No one could predict how quickly things could shift. If stories like this, where everything seems normal until it suddenly isn't, draw your attention, take a moment to like and subscribe, because what unfolds next is something no one in that quiet town ever expected. By the time the day began to slip into evening, the sense of normalcy had already started to crack. Something was changing, and once it did, there would be no going back. As the day moved forward, the calm routine slowly gave way to something more strained. What had started as a normal responsibility began to feel heavier with each passing moment. Time seemed to stretch, and the quiet of the house no longer felt peaceful. It felt tense. Small frustrations, the kind most people brush off, didn't fade the way they should. Instead, they lingered, building into something harder to control. Inside that space, expectations and reality were no longer aligned. Responsibility requires patience, and patience isn't always easy, especially for someone still learning how to manage pressure. The situation didn't change all at once. It shifted gradually, moment by moment, until the atmosphere itself felt different. The sense of control that once existed began to slip, replaced by confusion and poor judgment. What makes moments like this so unsettling is how ordinary they begin. There's no warning sign loud enough for others to hear, no signal that something irreversible is about to happen. Just a series of choices, each one carrying more weight than the last. And when those choices are made in the wrong state of mind, the outcome can change everything. Somewhere in those unfolding moments, the situation crossed a line that could never be undone. The kind of line that turns an ordinary day into something remembered for all the wrong reasons. And outside, the world continued as usual, completely unaware that everything inside had already changed. Stories like this remind us how quickly things can shift, how fast a situation can move from normal to unthinkable. If you're still here, Take a moment to share this story with someone who values understanding real-life events, because what happens next brings the weight of those moments into the open. By the time the tension broke, the aftermath had already begun, and soon, questions would follow. Questions that demanded answers no one was prepared to face. The shift from confusion to reality happened quickly, and once it began, there was no slowing it down. What had taken place behind closed doors was no longer contained within those walls. Concern turned into alarm, and before long, the situation drew the attention of people trained to ask difficult questions and look beyond surface explanations. When authorities arrived, the atmosphere changed completely. What once felt like a private moment was now something being carefully examined. Every detail mattered. Every statement carried weight. At first, the explanation seemed uncertain, fragmented, pieces of a story that didn't fully connect. But as time passed, those fragments began to take shape, and the gaps between them became harder to ignore. Dylan Schumaker was now at the center of that scrutiny. Investigators worked methodically, comparing words with evidence, looking for consistency, trying to understand what had truly happened. In situations like this, the truth doesn't always reveal itself immediately. It emerges slowly, through careful observation and persistent questioning. The tone of the case began to shift as more information came forward. What may have initially seemed unclear started to point in a more serious direction. Decisions made in a short span of time were now being analyzed from every angle, each one carrying consequences far beyond that single day. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like the video. It helps bring more real stories like this into focus. Stories that go beyond headlines and explore what really happened. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that this was no longer just a situation to be explained. It was one that demanded accountability. And with that realization came the next step: formal charges, marking the point where the story moved from uncertainty into the hands of the justice system. The courtroom carried a different kind of silence, one filled with anticipation rather than uncertainty. By the time proceedings began, the story had already moved beyond questions of what happened to a deeper examination of why it happened and who would be held responsible. Every seat in the room faced forward, attention fixed on a process that would determine the outcome of everything that had unfolded. At the center of it all was Dylan Schumaker, no longer just a name in an investigation, but a defendant standing before the law. The prosecution carefully laid out their case, focusing on evidence, timelines, and the conclusions drawn from expert analysis. Each point was presented with the intention of showing that the actions in question were not accidental, but carried a level of intent that could not be ignored. On the other side, the defense worked to challenge that narrative. They questioned interpretations, emphasized age and immaturity, and sought to create reasonable doubt. Their arguments focused on perspective, how quickly a situation can escalate, and how a lack of experience can lead to irreversible mistakes. The courtroom became a space where two versions of the same story were placed side by side, leaving it to the jury to decide which one carried the truth. Witnesses spoke, evidence was examined, and moments of silence filled the gaps between testimonies. Each detail added weight to the case, shaping how the events would ultimately be understood. It wasn't just about facts, it was about interpretation, responsibility, and consequence. Moments like these remind us how important it is to stay informed and understand the full story. If you're following along, consider subscribing for more deep dives into real cases that reveal how quickly life can change. In the end, the deliberation came to a close. The verdict was delivered, and with it came a decision that would define the future, bringing the courtroom phase to an end, but leaving lasting consequences that would extend far beyond those walls. When the courtroom emptied and the final words had been spoken, what remained wasn't just a verdict, it was the weight of everything that led up to it. The case had moved through investigation, testimony, and judgment, but its impact didn't end there. For everyone connected to it, life had been permanently altered in ways that couldn't be undone. For Dylan Schumaker, The outcome meant facing the reality of long-term consequences. Decisions made in a short span of time had now shaped the course of an entire future. What once may have felt like a single moment had stretched into something far greater, years defined by reflection, accountability, and the understanding of what cannot be reversed. Beyond the courtroom, the effects reached even further. A family was left to carry a loss that words can't fully capture. A community that once felt predictable was forced to confront the fact that even in the most ordinary places, unimaginable events can occur. The sense of normalcy from the beginning of this story no longer existed in the same way. It had been replaced by awareness, by the knowledge that actions, no matter how brief, can leave lasting marks. What makes stories like this difficult isn't just what happened, but what they reveal. They remind us that responsibility isn't something that can be taken lightly, and that choices made under pressure can have consequences far beyond what anyone expects. It's not about simplifying the situation into easy answers. It's about recognizing the complexity and learning from it. If this story made you pause and think, take a moment to share it with someone else. And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like these, real, challenging, and thought-provoking, are worth understanding, not just hearing. In the end, what began as an ordinary day became something unforgettable. And long after the headlines fade, the lessons remain.